The bell does not ring quickly. It drags through the air like something wounded, a single trembling note rolling across the courtyard and sinking into every watching chest. For the condemned, that sound is not just a summons, it is a verdict, a reminder that the world has run out of mercy. And as the torchlight flickers across the stone walls and the early frost clings to the dirt beneath their bare feet, one question rises louder than the crowd gathering to witness the spectacle. What if the darkest executions of the medieval world were never meant to kill, but to break everything human inside you first? The Middle Ages are often painted with the colors of chivalry and kings, of illuminated manuscripts and holy crusades. Yet beneath the banners and saints, beneath the hymns and crowns, there existed a justice system crafted not for fairness but for fear. A system built by rulers who needed obedience, by churches that demanded purity, and by societies convinced that pain could purify the soul. In that world, suffering was not accidental. It was engineered, studied, perfected. Imagine standing in a village square where punishment was not hidden behind prison walls, but displayed as public theater. The crackle of burning pitch, the hiss of a heated iron, the wet thud of a body striking wood, rope, or wheel. In these places, the line between justice and cruelty blurred until it vanished entirely. And the men who forged the execution devices, blacksmiths, soldiers, priests, believed they were shaping instruments of order, not nightmares that would echo for centuries. But the true horror of medieval execution isn't just the physical brutality. It lies in the psychology, the deliberate stripping away of identity, dignity, and hope. These punishments were designed to make an example of the condemned, yes, but also to reshape the minds of the witnesses. Every scream served as a warning. Every broken limb became a sermon. Every body left hanging or burning or buried alive whispered the same message. Order must be preserved, no matter the cost. Tonight, we peel back the curtain that history often tries to close. We revisit the execution grounds that kings and bishops preferred to forget. We study the tools that turn pain into policy, and we confront the reality that many of these methods were far more calculated, far more inventive, and far more monstrous than our modern imaginations dare to believe. Across the next 10 chapters, you'll witness the wheel that slowly shattered the body bone by bone, the fires that consumed the accused while crowds prayed for their souls, the pits, the ropes, the blades, each crafted with a chilling precision meant to prolong, not prevent, suffering. You'll learn why some prisoners begged for death long before it arrived and why others were kept alive for hours, even days, because their agony served purposes far greater than their lives ever did. But as we step into this darkness, remember, these methods were not born from madness alone. They were forged in courts, sanctified by scripture, justified by fear, and executed in daylight before ordinary eyes. And perhaps the most disturbing truth is this: many of them were considered righteous. If you're ready to see how far human cruelty can reach when it hides behind law, faith, and authority, then stay with me. What comes next is not easy to watch. It's not meant to be. But it will reveal a side of medieval history deeper, darker, and far more real than anything the textbooks ever dared to show. And before we descend into the first execution method, make sure you're subscribed. This journey into forgotten horrors is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what lies ahead. In the medieval world, justice began not with mercy, but with fear. Fear of disorder, fear of sin, fear that a single heretic could infect an entire village the way rot spreads through grain. To understand why executions grew so brutal, you must first understand the foundations beneath them: bones, fire, and iron. These were not merely tools of punishment, they were pillars of a society terrified of collapse. Most people lived in constant uncertainty: famine, disease, invasion. Life felt fragile, unpredictable, always one harvest or one plague away from ruin. So rulers crafted a justice system built on spectacle, a theater of pain meant to create the illusion of control. A man executed publicly was not just a criminal being punished. He was a symbol that the world still had order, that chaos could be contained. The more dramatic the punishment, the stronger that message became. The church added its own layer of logic, one far more chilling. It taught that suffering could purify the soul, that pain burned away sin the same way fire burned impurities from metal. If a condemned person screamed, it meant the devil inside them was being driven out. If they begged for forgiveness, the priests believed salvation had finally taken hold. Torture and execution, then, were framed not only as justice but as acts of spiritual mercy. The agony of the body was seen as the cleansing of the soul, and in a time when few could read, pain became a form of communication. A broken body hanging in the village square was a sermon everyone understood. It taught obedience better than scripture and frightened even the innocent into submission. Spectacle replaced philosophy. Horror replaced law. The people watched because they believed they had to, and slowly, watching became a kind of ritual, one that reinforced their place in a world where authority was absolute. Yet this brutality was not only about control, it was about reassurance. Seeing justice delivered reassured villagers that evil was being purged. Watching an accused heretic suffer reassured the faithful that God's order still held firm. And witnessing a thief mutilated before the crowd reassured the poor that the scales of fate, however cruel, still had a balance. This is the paradox that shaped medieval justice. Cruelty was seen as righteousness. Torture was framed as duty. Execution was portrayed as a moral act. The same pillars that built their cathedrals also built their scaffolds. Understanding this grim logic is essential because the 10 methods you're about to witness were not accidents of history. They were the deliberate creations of a world convinced that pain was the only language powerful enough to keep humanity in line. These foundations, fear, faith, and the spectacle of suffering, form the dark stage upon which medieval justice performed its most savage acts, and it is upon this stage that our first execution method now steps into the torchlight. The first 5 execution methods on this descent into medieval brutality reveal how far a society can go when fear and spectacle become law. Each of these tortures pushed the human body beyond its natural threshold, turning punishment into theater and suffering into a message carved into flesh. And as the crowds gathered, families, priests, beggars, nobles, the condemned stood at the center of a ritual designed not only to kill them, but to remind every witness of the invisible chains binding their world together. In these executions, bones broke, breath failed, fire consumed, and hope dissolved long before death arose. 1. Breaking on the wheel. Few methods matched the wheel for pure, deliberate cruelty. It emerged in Central Europe during the late Middle Ages, refined by executioners who understood anatomy all too well. The victim was strapped to a wooden wheel as wide as a man's height, limbs stretched unnaturally, joints exposed like hinges waiting to snap. With each swing of the executioner's iron bar, bones splintered, the arms first, then the legs, then whatever remained unbroken. The crowd listened for the crack, a sound that echoed like distant thunder. Sometimes the victim was left atop a pole, wheel and all, suspended for days as birds picked at exposed wounds. A young thief once whispered to a witness, moments before the blows fell, "Don't look away. If someone sees me, maybe I won't die alone." But the wheel was made for loneliness. No one could stand beside a man whose body was about to be unmade. 2. The heretic's pyre, burning at the stake. Fire was the church's chosen weapon for those who threatened spiritual order. Heresy was not merely a crime. To the medieval mind, it was a disease capable of spreading and unraveling God's plan. Burning purified the soul through flame, or so the priests claimed. Victims were chained to a post, brush stacked at their feet, the air thick with pitch. As the torch touched the wood, smoke rose first, slow, stinging, choking. Skin blistered before flames kissed it. Crowds often prayed aloud while the condemned screamed, convinced they were witnessing salvation rather than torment. One young woman accused of witchcraft stared defiantly into the sea of faces as the fire climbed her dress. "If your God wanted my voice silent," she said, "he would have made me afraid." Her final cry was swallowed by the roar of the flames, leaving behind only ashes and the unsettling certainty that belief could justify any cruelty. 3. The Scavenger's Daughter. In Tudor England, the Scavenger's Daughter appeared as the sinister counterpart to the infamous rack. Where the rack stretched a body until joints separated, the daughter crushed. It was a metal frame shaped like a cruel iron bow. The victim knelt, folded forward, and was clamped until knees touched chest and spine curved unnaturally. Blood vessels burst under the pressure, pooling in eyes, ears, and nose. Some fainted, others begged for the sweet relief of unconsciousness that never came. This device was meant for traitors, spies, or anyone who needed a confession squeezed out of them. One prisoner, an older man accused of conspiracy, whispered to the guard tightening the frame, "If I confess, you break me. If I refuse, you still break me." The guard simply nodded, for in this era, truth mattered far less than obedience. 4. The garrote. The garrote was deceptively simple. Just a wooden chair and an iron collar attached to a screw. Yet its efficiency made it one of the most feared execution methods across Spain and parts of Italy. The condemned was seated, wrists bound, throat pressed against the cold metal ring. With each slow turn of the screw behind the chair, the collar tightened, crushing the windpipe, snapping vertebrae, or both. Silence replaced spectacle. The garrote was intimate, almost personal, with death delivered only inches from the executioner's face. One bystander recalled watching a rebel meet his end. He did not scream. His eyes simply widened as though he realized the world would continue without him. The garrote proved that brutality didn't always need flames or shattered bones. Sometimes a single twist of iron could end both rebellion and hope. 5. Thrown into the pit, the slow death below. While some executions demanded crowds, others thrived in darkness. Pits existed beneath castles, monasteries, and city courts. Deep, damp holes where prisoners were lowered and forgotten. These pits were not dungeons, they were graves dug deliberately early. Victims starved slowly, drank foul water trickling down stone walls, and listened to rats scurry across the floor. Some pits were narrow enough that the condemned couldn't lie down, others had spikes hidden beneath filth. One young man condemned for desertion scribbled a final message on the wall with a broken fingernail. "They fear what I saw on the battlefield, so they bury me alive instead." No executioner needed to strike the killing blow. The pit itself became a silent accomplice, draining life hour by hour in a darkness deeper than punishment deserved. These first 5 methods reveal a medieval world where pain served a purpose far greater than death itself. Each technique carried a message: obey, fear, conform, and each victim became a symbol carved into public consciousness. But as brutal as these punishments were, they were only the beginning. The next 5 methods venture even deeper into the realm where suffering was crafted with artistry, precision, and a darkness that still lingers in history's shadow. The first 5 executions revealed how medieval justice weaponized fear. But these next 5 step beyond fear into something far more suffocating: the deliberate destruction of humanity itself. These were punishments crafted not simply to kill, not merely to deter, but to erase the person beneath the flesh. Every scream, every gasp, every shred of dignity torn away reflected a society capable of shaping nightmares with purpose and pride. And as we descend through these final 5 methods, the air grows heavier, the cruelty sharper, and the line between justice and madness dissolves completely. 6. Boiling alive. Boiling was not a punishment born in noble courts or scholarly councils. It rose from desperation and answered to crimes considered especially vile: poisoning, counterfeiting, treason. England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire each adopted it during periods of unrest, believing only a punishment as dramatic as the crime could restore order. The condemned was bound in chains, lowered into a cauldron filled not always with water, but sometimes with oil, tar, wine, or even molten lead. The liquid was rarely preheated. Instead, the executioner kindled a fire beneath the cauldron while the victim was already inside, forcing them to feel every incremental rise in temperature as skin reddened, blistered, and peeled. Witnesses later recalled the sound: the frantic thrashing against metal, the hiss of flesh, the bubbling mixture of steam and human agony. One woman accused of poisoning her employer begged the priest beside her, "Don't forgive me. Let me hate something in these final minutes." Her voice grew cracks as the heat climbed, until at last it was swallowed by a single final exhale. The crowd watched with horrified fascination, convinced the spectacle itself cleansed the community. In truth, it only revealed how easily fear transforms ordinary people into spectators of suffering. 7. The Brazen Bull. If boiling was born from fear, the Brazen Bull was born from artistry twisted into sadism. Ancient in origin, but revived in medieval imagination, it was a hollow bronze statue crafted in the shape of a bull. Inside its belly waited iron hooks and chambers designed to amplify screams. A fire burned beneath the sculpture until the bronze glowed red. The condemned was forced through a small opening, trapped within metal that would soon heat faster than their flesh could withstand. As flames licked the bull's belly, the metal became an oven. Skin fused to bronze, lungs filled with superheated air, the body convulsed against hooks meant to prolong agony. What made the Brazen Bull unique was its performance value. The device's pipes transformed screams into sounds resembling an animal's bellow, turning human torment into a grotesque symphony. A chronicler described an execution where a political dissident was placed inside. A young apprentice blacksmith watched, trembling, and whispered, "Sounds alive." His master replied, "That's the point. Pain should have a voice." The bull roared for nearly an hour before falling silent, leaving behind only scorched air and the echo of a cruelty so engineered it bordered on ritual. 8. Drawn and quartered. If the Brazen Bull theatricalized suffering, then being drawn and quartered represented the state's absolute, merciless authority. Reserved in England for those who committed high treason, it was designed not just to kill, but to erase the traitor's legacy entirely. The condemned was dragged by horse to the execution site, often already injured from the journey. There, in front of a vast audience, they were hanged just until the edge of death, cut down while still conscious, and forced to endure the opening of their abdomen. Their entrails were pulled out and burned before their eyes. Only then did the final stage begin. The body, still barely breathing, was tied to 4 horses. With the executioner's command, the animals surged in 4 directions, limbs ripping from their sockets as the torso tore apart. One chronicler recorded the words of a Scottish rebel who faced this fate. As the hangman approached with his blade, the rebel muttered through clenched teeth, "A country is easier to break than a man's will." His executioners tore him into 4 pieces moments later. The remains were sent to different cities, displayed as warnings. Even in death, he served the purpose the crown demanded: obedience through terror. 9. Flaying, being skinned alive. Flaying was one of the oldest, slowest, and most psychologically annihilating execution methods. It required a steady hand, a skilled knife, and a cold heart. Used across the medieval world from Byzantium to the Middle East to parts of Europe, it was reserved for traitors, rebels, and those whose deaths needed to carry symbolic weight. The victim was stripped, bound upright, and cut with surgical precision. The executioner made shallow incisions, peeling skin from muscle one section at a time. The process was slow by design. Flaying too quickly caused rapid blood loss, ending the spectacle prematurely. What made flaying uniquely horrifying was that the condemned often remained conscious for most of the procedure. Pain blurred into delirium, yet awareness lingered. A scribe once wrote of watching a rebel leader's flaying. He did not scream after the first cut. He only stared at something none of us could see. Nearby villagers approached cautiously, some praying, others unable to look away. When the execution finally ended, the skin of the condemned was often displayed, hung on walls, stretched across gates, as a public proclamation that rebellion would be met with more than death. It would be met with erasure. 10. The Blood Eagle. The Blood Eagle stands as one of history's most debated and feared execution rituals, rooted in Norse legend, but echoed in medieval imagination as the embodiment of ritualistic cruelty. The victim was tied face down, arms spread wide. The executioner carved along the spine, separating ribs from the backbone with precise cuts. Then the ribs were pulled outward and up, creating the grotesque shape of wings. Finally, the lungs were extracted and laid across the extended ribs, rising and falling in the open air until the final breath escaped. Whether performed exactly as sagas described or embellished through retellings, the psychological terror it carried was undeniable. It was not merely punishment, it was transformation into a symbol of absolute domination. One tale recounts a captured chieftain who endured the ritual in silence, refusing to give his enemies the satisfaction of hearing pain. As his ribs were pulled open, he whispered, Let my breath be the last thing you fail to conquer." Moments later, his lungs fluttered their final time. The warriors around him believed his silence had robbed them of victory, yet even their disappointment could not overshadow the brutality of the ritual, a spectacle where anatomy became theater and death became performance. Across these final 5 methods, medieval justice reached its darkest crescendo. Boiling turned suffering into steam. The brazen bull turned agony into sound. Drawing and quartering tore the body into political warnings. Flaying made the human form a canvas of terror, and the blood eagle transformed death itself into ritual. Each method reveals a world where pain replaced mercy and where the measure of justice was the measure of fear it produced. And yet, in the silence that follows each execution, a deeper question emerges. What does it say about a society when cruelty becomes tradition, and when suffering itself becomes the language of power? The next chapter will step back from the devices themselves and confront the unsettling truth. How these horrors lingered far beyond the Middle Ages, echoing into modern systems, modern punishments, and modern fears. The square was packed, faces pressed against one another, eyes wide with anticipation and fear. Children clung to their mothers' skirts while men spat nervously on the cobblestones, pretending indifference. And in the center, the condemned waited, bound, shivering, every muscle taut with dread. Public executions were not just punishments, they were communal performances, psychological theaters where terror was both instrument and message. The crowd did not come merely to witness death, they came to feel it, to measure themselves against it, to remind themselves that they had survived where another had not. A mother pressed her hands over her mouth as the rope tightened around the thief's wrists. She had brought her son to watch, insisting it was to teach him the price of sin, yet her own heartbeat betrayed her fear. The screams cut through the morning air like blades, but she forced herself to stay, gripping her child and whispering prayers that mingled hope with guilt. Each spasm of the victim's body, each crack of bone, made the lesson real, undeniable. In her mind, terror and morality had fused, a bitter elixir of fear, meant to instruct rather than kill. Executioners, too, carried a weight the public rarely saw. They were craftsmen of death, skilled in the application of pain, yet haunted by the faces of those they dispatched. One hung his axe on the wall that night, staring at the blood-stained wood as though it might confess to him what his conscience could not. In dreams, he saw the victims moving still, pleading without words, eyes wide, always just out of reach. Daylight offered absolution only in routine. At night, the hammer and iron bars were replaced by shadows of guilt that refused to fade. For the condemned, time slowed in ways unimaginable. A man slated for the wheel felt every heartbeat stretch into eternity. The world became a microscope, focusing on the sting of wind across his face, the weight of the rope against his skin, the murmurs of the crowd. He whispered a prayer he did not fully believe, a hope that mercy might reach him in some corner of eternity. Even when the executioner raised the iron bar, he held onto that fragment of dignity, that singular act of defiance in a universe designed to strip it away. Yet the most unsettling truth lies in the crowd itself. Cheers, gasps, and prayers blended into a single, indistinguishable chorus. Ordinary people, bakers, weavers, priests, soldiers found themselves drawn into the rhythm of suffering. Complicit in the creation of terror, they were not monsters. They were witnesses, participants, the instruments through which society reinforced its own hierarchy of fear. Watching became a way of belonging, a perverse connection to authority, a survival strategy disguised as morality. In the interplay of the condemned, the crowd, and the executioner, medieval executions reveal something profound about the human psyche. How fear can be transformed into spectacle, guilt into ritual, horror into shared experience. And as the echoes of screams faded into silence, each participant, mother, child, executioner, prisoner, carried with them a shadow that lingered long after the blood was washed from the stones, reminding us that cruelty is never a solitary act. It is a story told through many voices, many hearts, all bound together in the theater of terror. The wheel no longer spins in the village square, the flames of heretics' pyres no longer lick the night air. The pits are filled, the brazen bowls melted into memory, and yet the essence of medieval cruelty endures. It has not vanished, it has transformed. Where once the body was the canvas, now the mind becomes the stage. Societies still wield fear as a tool, shaping obedience, compliance, and silence with precision far subtler than iron or flame. Consider modern parallels. Psychological torture, interrogation methods designed to break the human spirit without leaving visible scars, echo the medieval obsession with prolonging agony. State surveillance, coercion, and public shaming replicate the same dynamics once performed in the square. The individual isolated, exposed, and made to bear the weight of collective judgment. Media spectacle, viral humiliation, and the social enforcement of morality serve as contemporary scaffolds of control where the crowd's gaze replaces the executioner's blade. Even ordinary lives feel the residue of these lessons. Fear shapes behavior, teaches compliance, and disciplines thought. Institutions, political, religious, cultural, still understand the power of suffering, shame, and terror, often hidden behind rhetoric of law, safety, or virtue. The logic is identical. Pain, whether of flesh or psyche, ensures obedience. Authority is maintained not by fairness, but by the calculated promise of consequences. And in the quiet corners of our minds, we carry shadows of that terror, reminders of the lessons our ancestors learned in public squares centuries ago. Yet there is a final, haunting truth. History is not dead. It is waiting in the shadows, watching whether we repeat it. The executions, the cruelty, the instruments of torment, these were not mere relics. They were experiments in human behavior, blueprints for power built on fear. To witness them is not just to confront the past, but to recognize the ways in which our world still mirrors it. As the echoes of hammers, flames, and anguished cries fade, the question remains, will we learn from these horrors, or will the shadows rise again, disguised in modern robes, screens, and systems? The legacy of medieval justice is not merely the bodies it consumed, but the human capacity for cruelty it exposed, and the choice that remains for every society in every age us to either honor humanity or repeat the darkness. History whispers its warning. The question is whether we will listen.